Welcome to Commander Central, episode 78, a special bonus episode being released on a Thursday, where we are going to do a deck tech for Patreon supporter Dan Mell, specifically his Commander Damia, Sage of Stone. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
How you guys feeling this early Sunday morning?
Sleepy.
Sleepy and cold?
Just
'Cause it's
sleepy.
miserable out?
It's like 3 degrees outside. That's what the thermometer said in my car.
Although really that's like not necessarily
Cold.
crazy for January in Wisconsin. It's just we've not really had a winter till now. So it's kicking
Still
me.
not winter yet. Where the hell is our snow?
I guess, yeah.
Hey, I'm happy with the cold, not the snow. I
The
don't like
snow actually makes it warmer.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Don't care. Don't want the snow.
We didn't get any Commander games in between our last show and today because this is an unusual time to record. However, we got a pre-release in, so I thought we'd spend a minute or two at least talking about that. Chris did 2, and Max and I did 1 each. What guild did you go with, Chris?
I played Gruul in the first guild and played Rakdos in the second one.
And Max took Gruul,
Yep.
and I went Orzhov. So what did you think of the guilds you played?
They were what they were, pretty much.
Nothing surprising?
No.
What'd you wind up doing in both the pre-releases?
I went 3-1 in the midnight and went 2-2 in the one. I think it was at 6 p.m. on Saturday.
Max, you were 2-2 with Gruul?
I was 2-2 with Gruul.
I went 1-3 with Orzhov. Wasn't great. I thought I had a good deck, but it just didn't play well. How about the mechanics? What did you guys think of the mechanics, getting to see them for the first time on the field?
I like Riot. That's a lot of fun.
Adapt is stupid.
Adapt is really strong. I felt like Riot seemed kind of boring going in, I thought. It was really effective.
Yes.
And particularly when you dropped that enchantment that
Rhythm of the
that
Wild.
gave you Riot and then played a creature with Riot. And I'm like, oh, that's just
That's a 4/4 with haste.
charming that you get to buff all your creatures and
Yep.
give them haste. Because I played against Max. The very last
Yes.
game of the round, we had to play each other.
And it was so much better than our practice game because he wiped the floor with me.
Afterlife didn't do a lot for me, but it's limited. Like you can't really compare it to other formats. Standard, you can probably do a lot more things with those tokens if you're building specifically around it. So something like Riot and Limited, you don't need a lot of cards to make Riot good. You don't need a ton of cards to make Adapt useful. They're just I think you need a perfect situation to really do anything with those tokens in Limited. But it was I enjoyed the environment. It was a fun set to play.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Big turnout. I mean, we had
40,
42, 48, something like that for our noon.
What was the midnight turnout?
38, I think, is what showed up
That's
at midnight.
pretty decent for a midnight release. Did you guys pull any decent cards out of your pools?
I wish.
Yeah, nothing.
Even out of like my 6 prize packs, I pulled absolute trash.
I did get Seraph of the Scales, which was the Orzhov Angel.
Yeah, I pulled one of those too. I don't consider it a bomb by any
Well,
means.
it was really disappointing. There was literally one match where I played it on turn like 5 or something. My mythic Orzhov Angel, that's a 4/3, and then like pass a turn, and then some player across the field played his common flyer that was like a 3/4 or a 4/3 or something.
With
Like,
Adapt.
oh, with Adapt also. And I'm like, oh, that's good that your common's the equivalent of my mythic, and you can make it better via Adapt.
You
then-
just give her Death Touch.
And, well, yeah, I guess you have to activate it. And then I think I got it out at least 3 times, but it might have been 4 times. It was at least 3. And I never once made Afterlife tokens because it got exiled all 3 times because there's
Yep.
a ton of exile removal.
There's a lot of exile.
So that didn't impress me. I saw Kaya come down in one game, and I saw Dovin in a different game, and neither of those 2 really impressed me in Limited.
Kaya's better in Limited than Constructed, in my opinion, but...
Yeah, probably, because she did hit. I had that. It's a Skeleton Warrior that's kind of the bad Gravecrawler that did pretty good work, and she did hit that at one point in time. But other than that, it was just because it was an Orzhov mirror match, so it was just 2 of us wet noodling at 30 life. we went to time on game 2 before I finally pulled it out because there's so much life gain. But yeah, those 2 really didn't impress me either. But it was the games I watched. Everything I watched was basically Gruul decks and Simic decks trying to outrace each other. But that's what Gruul and Simic do. So before we get to Dan's Damia Sage of Stone deck. If you too wanted us to do a deck tech on one of your decks, how would you make that happen, Max?
Head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central, and you can look at all of our Patreon rewards. Specifically, this reward lands around the $15 and above levels.
Yes, indeed. And if you want to find us on social media, Chris, how do you do that?
You can find us on the Twitter by searching, I suppose, would it be at or searching CMDR Central?
Just search CMDR Central.
Just put an at CMDR Central and we'll find you. You can search us up on Facebook by searching CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube. Search CMDR Central. And online at cmdrcentral.com.
.com, in honor of our friends to the north at CCO Podcast.
Yeah.
All right. Damia, Sage of Stone, a commander from the original commander set in 2013, I believe.
No. Try again.
Is that not where she's from?
It's way earlier.
2012?
It's probably one of the
2011?
originals, yeah.
It was original set, but for some reason I thought it was 2013.
No, 2013 was the Laurel.
Oh, that's right. So, and then 2012 would have been the year they had off, so it would have been 2011. I am getting old. All right.
It's also really early on a Sunday morning.
So from the original 2011 commander set, Damia Sage of Stone. You want to read the card to us here, Max?
Yeah, Damia Sage of Stone is a 4 generic mana and Sultai, so green, blue, and a black, for a 4/4 Gorgon Wizard. She has Death Touch. You also skip your draw step, but at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have fewer than 7 cards in your hand, draw cards equal to the difference.
That is really decent.
Maybe.
So Dan has a couple rules here he gave us before he started. He said his budget is flexible, but he doesn't want a card worth over $100, which gives you ample room, I suppose. His desired power level is 75%. Said he wants to focus on synergies within the deck and not individually powerful cards. All of his decks like to include ramp, draw, wrath effects, artifact enchantment removal, creature removal, preferably exile, and ways to destroy problematic lands, plus a few ways to hate graveyards.
Man, it's like you listen to our show.
That sounds exactly like the kind of thing we would say on the show. And he has a personal band list. What is that list, Chris?
His personal band list is Cyclonic Rift, Craterhoof Behemoth, Mana Crypt / Mana Vault, Rhystic Study, Legendary Eldrazi Titans, Deadeye Navigator, Mass Land Destruction, and 2-card infinite combos.
So no Blood Bond, Max. I see you keep trying to put it in this deck for him. No Blood Bond. Bad Max.
I literally stopped after I read that.
You're like, I'm done.
I can't do this deck tech.
Wow, that's terrible. I want to know what we're going to do with this deck now. So he's got an average CMC of 3.36, which, considering Damia is herself 14 mana to cast, that's pretty decent. And he's pretty evenly split among all 3 colors, and his lands are distributed pretty equally too, so that all looks good. Since Dan was talking about the things he likes to do, let's kind of look at this in terms of building a deck the way Dan wants to build it. And let's look at his mana base first. He's got 39 lands.
Which I thought was a little high, maybe?
I have asked him about that before.
I think we all have.
Yeah, because I've seen a few of his decks, and he does tend to run 39 to 40 lands, I believe. And I think he said everyone in their meta just does it. That's just how they play.
Never missing a land drop's pretty nice.
It is.
Not having to mulligan is nice, too.
And in this case, you're in a commander where, assuming she's on the field, you're going to draw full grip. So you're not going to really get flooded on terms of lands because you're just going to get, even if you do draw like 4 of them, you're still going to get 3 non-land cards just because of what Damia does. So that's pretty useful. That helps a lot there as well.
I suppose we could really consider this 38 lands because of Dryad Arbor.
True, because that doesn't tap anyway. Yeah. Yep. Well, in you kind of mentioned Dryad Arbor, but there are 5 lands that ETB tapped, or in the case of Dryad Arbor, can't make mana the turn they come into play. But of 39 lands, 34 of them being usable the turn they come in seems pretty reasonable. He has 16 basics.
Which I enjoy. I do like seeing a lot of basics in a deck. I noticed a lot of people that I've looked at their decks, they cut away from basics. And I wonder if they have just never ran into a Ruination or Blood Moon or
I'm sure
something like that.
And I have mentioned this before, but I definitely don't run enough basics. I'm usually around 12, I think maybe 14, but I don't usually have I don't have more than 14. I think maybe Mina and Den where I ramp a lot, but other than that, I don't have a ton of basics. And in my case, I know what the thought process is. I'm just gonna get screwed on occasion when I come across the Blood Moon, and I've just accepted that. So maybe that's what the mindset is for some people
I
too.
run 15 in Alesha, but I have all the duels
Right.
already, and it's just I'm on perfect curve. It's like, why not just play basics then?
And if you do have a decent amount of artifact ramp, that solves that a little bit too. You're like, okay, well, I've got 12 basics, but I've got a dozen artifacts in here too, so I can get away with maybe having less basics. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule that says you have to have 16 basics or anything, but I think you should at least think about that a little bit. And it seems like he has. I mean, he'll be fine. He'll survive any Blood Moon or a Ruination or a Back to Basics with no problem.
Yep. I always start usually with a deck of at least 5 basics of each color of the deck that I'm playing with, and then go from there, cutting them or adding more depending on the build.
I think in a 2-color deck, I usually start with a dozen, not of each. I start with 6 of each for a dozen basics in a 2-color deck.
Yep.
And I will maybe add more, but I'm like, I don't want to fall less. I don't want to have less than 12. So that's kind of usually where I start. So you mentioned Dried Arbor. What are your thoughts on Dried Arbor in this deck? Because that's the one land that jumped out as me as kind of being out of place.
I really don't know. I mean, I honestly think it's a bad card in Commander. Wrath effects just kill it.
So you lose your land to the first Wrath of God. You lose a land to the first Wrath of God, which is never great.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
so the trade
you could reanimate it for 0. I guess.
Can in a Muldrotha deck or something.
Yeah.
Like you can reanimate it, but in this deck I don't know if you're going to waste your limited reanimation opportunities on a Dried Arbor. And so the advantage of Dried Arbor usually is people run Green Sun Zenith.
Yep.
So you can drop your turn 1 green mana source and then Green Sun Zenith for 0 and go get a Dried Arbor into play.
And be on 2 lands.
And be on 2 lands on turn 1. So then on turn 2, when you do your thing, you're on 3 lands ready. So it's a nice turn 1 way to ramp effectively if you have a Green Sun Zenith in your deck.
It's also good in like a weenie creature deck that really relies on creatures because it's a free creature drop.
Or if you are, I guess he has a Skull Clamp in here. So maybe the thought process is it's a way to, later on in the game, turn one of your lands into 2 cards for 1 mana.
Tap it to Skull Clamp it itself. Yep.
So that's a decent use of it. I would say, though, I feel like if you probably should have Green Sun Zenith in your deck if you're playing Dried Arbor. I don't know if the downsides offset the upsides, I don't know if the upsides being able to clamp it offsets the downsides of losing it to that first Wrath without the option to Green Sun Zenith it on turn 1. So that's my thought on it. I feel like you either want Green Sun Zenith or you don't want Dried Arbor most of the time. Other than that, I thought the land base looked, if like you told me to brew a Damia deck, that would probably roughly be what my first pass would look like. Except for I would put Scavenger Grounds in the deck. Because I like Scavenger Grounds.
Yeah, I would definitely put Scavenger Grounds in this deck over like Path of Ancestry because he's only running a total of 6 wizards, including Damia.
Yes.
So that Scry effect really isn't going to do much long game. Yeah, it fixes your mana, but not a big fan of that card unless you really go heavy into the... wow, it's early. Here we go. The same creature type. Tribal. There we go.
Unless you go heavy into tribal.
Yeah, we'll go like that.
The one other land I would mention, especially based on how many strong creatures he has in this deck and his commander, I would have a Homeward Path in this deck. I do not want somebody else taking Damia and drawing 7 cards a turn, or taking away that Razakath that's in this deck, or taking away the Gitrog monster, or taking away Archfiend of Ifnir. I mean, there's a lot of cards in here that I don't want somebody else. Nezahal. I just don't want those cards on somebody else's side of the field. Now, maybe you never, ever see a bribery effect, but I feel like there's just no downside really to a Homeward Path, particularly in this mana base where he's not being greedy. He doesn't have a ton of colorless sources. I think you can afford to put a Homeward Path in there. And if it saves you 1 out of 15 games from somebody stealing something crazy from you, or at least screws up their plans, like if you're playing against a Mariki deck, or you're playing against a Rabinia Soulsinger deck or something, and like you drop the Homeward Path on turn 3, they're just like, I can't do anything now until they draw a Strip Mine. It's like there are times it does that too. Even if you're not going to lose a creature, you just mess up someone's plans.
For sure.
Other than that, I think he's got a well-constructed mana base, and I think he's in good shape there. Actually, there's one more I do have a note on. Ancient Tomb. In the past, we've mentioned not recommending it because it was a $50 card. It's still a $20 card, and that's a lot of money.
But actually, I found out the other day that Ultimate Masters is actually not a lot of people have it. I know RLGS has it.
A lot of stores don't.
Yeah.
It's a $20 card now. If we look back at this time in
a year from now,
it's not going to be a $20 card. It's going to be a $30 card.
That's why I have my playset.
Mm-hmm.
So I play Legacy.
Number one, if you ever imagine you're going to run an Ancient Tomb, I feel like just get them now because they're not going down, and it's not going to probably get reprinted anytime in the near future.
No.
It took this long to get it outside like maybe a master set or like a special
it was the
box topper
masterpiece
equivalent or something. But like we may well never see one for a long time. And in this deck where your commander costs 14 mana, like we said,
you're halfway there.
But like 7's a lot of mana. I say that as somebody who's brewing terrible Teysa Envoy of Ghosts right now, which also costs 7 mana.
Oh, and you have no green.
And I have no green, unlike this deck. Ancient Tomb being able to shave an extra mana off makes a big difference. So I would strongly consider that in this deck. Like I said, $20 isn't nothing. I get that, but
he said anything less than $100.
He said less than 100, and that's less than 100. For less than 100, you can buy a playset and gem and 3 other decks on top of it. The next thing he said is he likes to have answers for things, whether it's board wipes or targeted removal. What do you guys think of as his answer suite he has here?
Which road do we want to start on first, like the instants or sorceries?
We can look at them both. Look at his targeted creature removal first. He's got things like Assassin's Trophy, which isn't even just creature removal. Assassin's Trophy hits a couple different things.
Yep.
He's running
Windgrace's
Judgment, which is pretty nice and solves quite a few problems. Status and Stature. The Stature half destroys target artifact, creature, or enchantment. So that is a fairly useful card. And among his sorceries, he's got Maelstrom Pulse.
Yep, for targeted, and then Sever the Bloodline.
Which hits... so he's got 2 different things between Maelstrom Pulse and Sever that will take care of a token swarm.
Yep.
And he said he does like exile effects as well. So I think that all looks pretty good, although personally I feel like if I'm playing green, I have a really tough time arguing against Beast Within. It hits everything.
I agree.
Yep.
And like I know Dan, having talked to him, he's really against, he doesn't like the idea of staples, always run this card, always run this card. But like Beast Within is one of the best targeted removal spells ever printed, just full stop. And I have a really tough time not putting it in a deck because it solves so many problems.
I agree.
And it's one thing to say I don't like staples that win you the game, like Cyclonic Rift. Beast Within doesn't win you the game; it just keeps someone else from winning the game.
Very true.
It could actually cause you to lose the game. That
by not
3/3
having
could
it.
change the course of the game.
I mean, it usually doesn't, but like there's also a downside to it. It's not like it's pure upside. You give
Have
someone
you
a
never
3/3
seen
token.
a 3/3 beast get suited up with a couple swords? You're like, oh no!
I've absolutely gotten hit with one, and at least at one point in the past, I've seen someone die to a Swan Song token they gave someone that was wearing, I think, 3 swords. It had 3 different swords on it, and it was swinging in for like 14 and untapping their lands and forcing discard. And so I've seen that happen to at least one person. So yeah, so for removal, I feel like maybe one more would do it, and I would definitely probably say Beast Within. It's just such a good card, instant speed. That would be maybe the thing I would add there. What are you guys' thoughts on what he's running?
I'm looking more at the board wipes, so he's running like Damnation and Crux of Fate for board wipes.
And Toxic Deluge.
I don't really like Crux of Fate because you're not running dragons. So for 2 more mana...
There's literally 0 dragons in this deck, I believe, correct?
Right. So for 3 more mana, just run Decree of Pain. You can cycle it to give everything -2/-2, or you can kill a ton of stuff and draw a ton of cards.
It's greedy. Decree of Pain's a greedy card, but
this is a high mana deck, anyways. Even though we said the convert mana cost was like 3.8 or whatever, it's still a high mana deck.
It is. I like Decree of Pain too, but I will just say this, just generically speaking, I would like anything in this deck that isn't named Crux of Fate. Like Crux of Fate, I just wouldn't run in this deck.
Yeah.
See, I run Crux of Fate in my Mogus deck, but I also run every other board wipe.
Right.
To.
Like it's different if you're running like
possible.
14 board wipes, and maybe you run it, but I feel like it just doesn't do enough in this particular deck to justify it.
And I think with Dan not wanting to run Rift, it makes finding options for board wipes a little harder, especially in these colors.
Maybe an Evacuation or Aether Spells or something. I realize Evacuation might hurt him too.
It says creatures are kind of expensive,
Yep.
particularly as commander.
But if you only have just the one out, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of different black board wipes out. I mean, like, this is an expensive stuff deck, but like, Inguruk's Wake is, what?
7 mana.
7 mana.
Gets rid of everything else.
And it's one-sided.
Yep.
So, I just, Crux Fate, I feel like you're just playing, it's just a bad damnation in this deck, and I don't know if it's worth running.
I do like it that's 5 mana. I mean, that is an upside to it.
Well, it's easy to say that, but like, black isn't white. White has 120 different board wipes. Black doesn't have nearly as many. So, the pickings are a little bit slimmer, but that's the one I don't necessarily love.
Unless he plays against Dragon decks.
And maybe that's the case. That's true.
majority
You know
of the
what? I
guys
didn't
in
think of
his-
that.
in his group. I don't think I've ever seen a Dragon deck out of any of them.
But I guess that's a good point. I didn't think of that. If you are in a meta where you're playing with like the same 6 friends and 2 of them have Dragon decks,
That makes sense.
that completely makes sense.
Yep.
So that's a good point. Good
Not trying
catch,
to
Chris.
argue it, but
No.
because I have seen that backfire before, where someone
For sure.
with a Dragon deck, they're just like, oh yeah, Dragon. Someone's like, Crux of Fate, destroy all dragons, and everyone on the table's like, thank you. I think I'm gonna let you win the game. You just saved us all.
Right. So he also mentioned he wanted to have some amount of ramp. And I think
Oh, boy.
this is the one so far that looks the most off to me. Because there's no artifact ramp in here. He only has 3 artifacts to begin with, and none of them are really ramp spells.
Nope.
I guess you can kind of say Crucible, but Crucible isn't a ramp spell. It doesn't get you ahead. It just lets you play lands from your graveyard if you happen to have one there.
And I would never consider Crucible a ramp card unless you're playing like the Gitrog monster or you're playing a Zusa.
Something that gives you double lands per turn.
Something that's giving you extra land drops. He does have like a Farseek and Edge of Autumn and stuff like that, but
but that's really it. He's got Farseek, he has Edge of Autumn, and I believe there was one more,
Far
Wanderings.
And then he also has Deep Reconnaissance.
Oh yeah, which is an older green card that lets you search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library, and you can flash it back.
Yep.
But that's 3 mana for 1 basic land, and flashback for 5.
Right.
So I would just run Kadama's Reach, or Cultivate over that, or Nature's Lore, or
Pierce Whim.
Pierce Whim, yeah, which does double duty.
3 wishes.
It removes and it
one?
ramps.
Yes, 3 wishes.
3 wishes, right. Spend $70 on your rampant growth.
The other one we did miss was Spring to Mind, the split card from Amonkhet. Spring
The spring half of it is a ramp spell.
is a ramp spell.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think out of all of them, I really don't like Deep Reconnaissance with the flashback for 5. I'd rather just run Pierce Whim, get your best land, get your Urborg, get anything out of your lands. You need that homeward path that we mentioned.
Perfectly fix your stuff.
And then get rid of all the a bunch of problems on the board.
Yeah. Also, no Soul Ring.
You know, I've played with Dan a few times. I don't think I've ever seen a Soul Ring come out of
And
him.
maybe he didn't write that in his ban list. Maybe he just doesn't like Soul Ring, and then because he put Crypt and Vault, so maybe Soul Ring is also on his personal ban list. And if that's the case, that's fine. If it's not, though, again, Damia costing 14 mana, I'd want a Soul Ring.
Unless he's in the same boat as me, where I have to double check my deck and make sure there's still a Soul Ring in it, because I never ever see it.
I mean,
well, and it's easy to forget Soul Ring, despite being in every single precon ever, is still like a $2 card.
2 to 3.
Yeah, because we were just doing a budget thing, building some budget decks that had was it a $25 budget?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't put a Soul Ring in it because I couldn't find room for it in the budget.
Because it's $250.
It's $250. But he didn't say he had a budget on this. I'm guessing that's
Right.
not why there isn't one in here. But
I mean, I know Chris would just say this anyways, but no signets. It seems really odd, especially with a very high-costed commander. And this is more of a long game deck. You're not trying to get Damia out on turn 2 or 3.
I'm big on signets. I'm big on the lockets.
I like Crucible, I like Chromatic Lantern in a 3-color deck.
Mm-hmm.
If perfectly fixes your stuff, it solves those homeward path problems. It lets you later on in the game, if you don't need the 2 mana off your Ancient Tomb, lets you just tap it for a color without taking damage.
Lets you tap your fetches.
Lets you tap your fetches, which is not the kind of thing I thought of until I've had that happen multiple times in the game, where I put that fetch down and I'm like, I don't want to crack it right now, because maybe later on I will get out a scroll rack or something, and I don't need the fixing, but also it doesn't do anything on its own. Chromatic Lantern solves that problem too.
Lantern might be another staple card that he doesn't like playing.
And that could be. So that would be one I would consider here, but if he doesn't like it, he doesn't like it. I just feel like with as expensive as Damia is in particular and some of these big bomby creatures, I would maybe run a little more ramp than he has.
I would 100% agree with
And
that.
a lot of that stuff is cheap. Like obviously Ancient Tomb was expensive, and that's kind of a ramp land, I guess. But Nature's Lore is $1. Sky Shroud Claim, since that reprint, is I think under $1.
Yep.
Rampant Growth is cheap. Those signets they're not nothing. They used to be 25 cents. Now they're $1 or $2, but that's still, I think, within his budget. The talismans are $1 or $2. Not as great as it was 5 years ago when they were $0.25, but they're still
Some
affordable.
Of the talismans are still expensive.
The foils are expensive. Because on the EDH Recast, we're going to give away a foil of each signet for, I think it was 1,000 Twitter followers. I went through to the price and I'm like, oh, those are pricier than we thought.
I think I have a foil of each signet now.
Nice.
That's what happens when you buy many boxes of Modern
Yeah,
Masters
right, yeah.
when they got reprinted.
Okay, so we're all in agreement. I think we think he needs a little more ramp just because of this deck.
Because of the high CMC on your
Commander in particular.
Yeah, well, I don't even want to just say commander, but like your win con type of cards that are in the creature base.
Yeah. Well, that leads us to the next thing here which is card draw. He likes to have a certain amount of card draw. And Damia draws you cards, and that's great. But you also need to have her in play to draw those cards. And if you can't ramp her out or get her out, if you're waiting till turn 7 to play her, and even then you play her and you wouldn't get your draw effect off her until the following turn on turn 8, that's a long time to try to get cards back into hand.
Yep.
And he does have a couple of smaller draw spells, but I don't know if it's enough to make up the difference. Like Deep Analysis, 4 mana to draw 2 cards, and then you can flash it back for 2 mana and 3 life. So you wind up spending all told 6 mana to get 3 cards at the cost of 3 life at sorcery speed. I think that's a decent card in a deck that cares about cast triggers, but I don't know if it is efficient enough for a slot. What do you guys think?
I really don't think so. I think more stuff like not even just draw, but card selection is what he should be looking at. Like a Search for Azcanta, it feeds his graveyard, which a lot of his creatures and some of his enchantments care about.
Yeah, we should know there's a bit of a graveyard and discard theme going on here. It's not like what the deck is entirely about, but there's some of that happening.
I suppose when you always have 7 cards in your hand with Damia, and if you do ever draw anything extra, you're just discarding
You're pitching
anyways.
it, right.
Might as well build something around that.
So yeah, I would say I think the filtering makes good sense, Max, talking about Search for Azcanta. Put stuff in the yard that lets you get those lands or those ramp spells to get Damia out faster to get your things happening right away. So I think that's a good call. And even things like Ponder. Ponder is never a card you regret. At any point in the game do you feel bad about drawing a Ponder, for the most part. It always lets you dig down and find something.
Yep. I mean, he is running 3 instant spells that draw him cards. Chemistry's Insight, Una's Grace, Radical Idea. 4 total. Think twice.
And actually the one I like the most there, I like Chemistry's Insight, particularly because this is a deck where you are going to have a full grip at some point, and being able to pitch that extra land that you've drawn, because it's a land dense deck, to draw 2 additional cards from it. That is pretty decent because the jump start.
I'm not a fan of the 1-for-1 card draws. I realize Radical Idea and Think Twice, if you do pitch them before you ever cast them, then
you can still jump start them later on.
You're kind of netting an extra card, but I don't like the 1-for-1s like that.
Again, I feel like they might make sense in something like a Talran deck, or I'm not sure what another example would be. Maybe
like a Jorian deck.
Sure, or Mizzix, where you are
upping those counters.
And like casting spells matters for some purpose.
Yep.
I don't think this is that deck though, so I just don't know. I would more lean into I'm spending this mana and getting this amount of cards every time consistently, and I'm getting cards ahead to get me to that point in the game where then I can rely on Damia.
Yeah. I mean, he's not even running any of the typical black card draws that we talk about.
Sure.
Read the Bones. I mean, Notion Rain would go in this deck.
Notion Rain would be perfect because you're putting stuff in the graveyard as well.
Notion Rain I could get behind. The black ones I can't for this deck. For the simple fact, I've discussed this before. When I'm playing blue with black, I lean more on the blue card
Sure.
draw than I do black because it's just more efficient.
Well, one of the things I think that makes a difference there too is what is your blue deck doing? If your blue deck cares about, if you're running counter spells in your blue deck, that maybe the black stuff makes sense because you're going to spend black mana to draw cards, leaving your blue mana free for counter spells. But he's not running, I don't think, any counter spells in this deck.
No, and blue's kind of, from the looks of it, like a splash type of color.
It's a support color in this deck, I think. So I think he needs just a little more solid draw that's going to get him bulk cards ahead to survive and have gas in hand until Damia is on the field. I don't think he needs a ton of it either. I think like 1 or 2 or 3 spells get you there.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
and replace a couple of them, I think, is another big thing. 'Cause if you replace them with more efficient ones, then you will just get ahead that way.
Yes. And that's one thing too, like we mentioned the average CMC of this deck and it being kind of low considering his creatures. Don't be misled too much by that though. It does matter. Your average CMC matters. But just because you added Blasphemous Act to your deck and your CMC jumped by from, 3.2 to 3.32 or whatever it would be, well, yeah, it went up. That Blasphemous Act is never, ever going to cost you 9 mana.
Yep.
Conversely, if you add a Cyclonic Rift to your deck, it's only going to hit your CMC for 2 in your deck and it looks great. Well, that's a 7 mana spell 95% of the time. And same thing here, like that Think Twice is only 2 mana, but it only draws you 1 card, and by the time you factor in, for the most part, you're looking at the flashback, well, it's not really, it's 5 mana you're investing for those 2 cards. And if I'm spending 5 mana on cards and not taking advantage of the flashback for like a Talrand trigger or something, I gotta draw 3 cards off
That new one
the
from
new, the Better Than Jace's Ingenuity card from Allegia, whose name I forgot.
And then draw or something.
Precognition field.
Yeah, precognition, but it's not field. But yes, that one.
I got there halfway. It's early.
It is way too early for us.
So, a draw. I think we all are on the same page there. The next thing I would mention is something that we've kind of talked about a bit in the last year, particularly, is protection. There's none in this deck that has a commander that I will tell you my opinion, and you guys can tell me if you share this. If I see someone play a Damia, or I see someone with a Damia in the command zone who's thinking about playing a Damia, if I see somebody across the room in a different pod that has Damia in their command zone, I'm still going to try to kill it. I will try to Doomblade your Damia in a different pod if I see one.
I agree. I mean, that card it gives you so much advantage over everyone else because you can just, let's say it's late game, you have 30 lands out, you can play out your hand, and then if no one kills, it's like, oh, guess what? I got another 7 cards the next turn.
Mm-hmm.
You will lose. You're going to lose. You will lose to that. So, it goes 2 ways. Not only do you not want Damia on the field because she does that, when you spend 2 mana to go for the throat someone's Damia, they're out 7 mana. And now they got to spend 9 to get her back out, or 11, or 13, or whatever it's going to wind up being. She's a perfect commander to kill, not only because she's so powerful, but it's so crippling to have to recast her.
It's great doing it right before their upkeep, too,
Absolutely.
when they have like 1 card in hand.
And he has 0 ways in his deck to stop that, I think. There's no counter spells, there's no Lightning Greaves, there's no Go for the Throat, there's no Heroic Intervention. There's no way to stop that from happening.
Even something like Asceticism would be fine in this deck. Anything that's going to give Damia Hexproof or Shroud to let her stick around. I
like Asceticism a lot because there's also some other big scary stuff you don't want stolen. You don't want that, or removed. You don't want your 6-mana Muldrotha killed. I guess Nuzzahal you can protect by discarding cards and you can redraw plenty, so that's fine. But
that's only protecting Nezahal.
It's only protecting Nezahal, and it's only protecting Nezahal. The discard only doesn't hurt you, assuming Damia is out refilling your hand.
Yep.
I guess Nezahal draws you cards too, but you don't want that Razaketh that you spent 8 mana for removed. You want to take plenty advantage of that, although again you can use his ability right away. But I just feel like there's this deck has board states that you are going to want to have not go away. So the first card I would add is Heroic Intervention.
Yeah.
2 mana, instant speed, save your board state.
I'd add Lightning Greaves first.
That would be the second one. Maybe I would inverse that order, but Greaves and Heroic Intervention, I don't think I'd run this deck without those two. And I think Asceticism is a strong consideration as well. I think you just there's enough things that you have to keep safe, and they're expensive things that you will feel terrible when they die.
Yeah. And even packing in some counter magic is probably smart, whether it's Counterspell, Mana Drain, or even like Mystic Confluence, where, only running a couple is probably still going to be nice over the long game to protect Damia. You don't need 10 counterspells in this deck.
Sure.
You need 2 or 3 as a...
Specific, it would be more...
Swan Song.
Swan
This is
Song
a
would
perfect
be
deck
one,
for Swan Song.
What's the one where you draw 2, opponent draws 3?
Arcane
or something?
Denial.
Something like that. Because, all it is just a tempo card.
Even
saying-
Negate. Negate. If all you care about is someone else board wiping or doomblading your creature or whatever, Negate and Swan Song will save you a ton of mana.
Yep.
And make life so much easier. But I get it. There are decks like I have one blue deck that doesn't have any counter spells intentionally just because I want that. And maybe this is his blue deck that has no counter spells, and that's what it is.
Okay.
I don't know that though. Maybe it's not. But like if it is, that's fine. You can still run Heroic Intervention and Asceticism and Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. Maybe. I just feel like I never feel bad drawing protection.
I'm just going to say this now because I can already hear the YouTube comments coming in. We need to use a different spell than Doomblade when we reference
We do,
protecting
absolutely.
Damia.
Right, I know.
Because she's black.
Yes, you're correct. Go for the throat.
There we go.
Using Go for the Throat or Hero's Downfall or even more so because I literally wrote an article saying don't run Doomblade. So yes, don't run Doomblade. But
I should go on Slack right now and just be like, so is Doomblade a good card? And just see how Slack blows up.
You don't go on Slack.
this weekend he has been. I actually thought someone hacked his account and logged on as Chris. So we've gone through the things Dan tries to do in his decks. So what are your overall comments? We've given a few suggestions about things to change. Any observations or comments here?
I spent an hour looking at this deck last night. I spent 45 minutes looking at it this morning, and I still don't know how he wins with this.
So that's number one, a problem that generally you can apply to every Damia deck I've ever seen. I think she's a strong commander, but you have a tough time looking at her and figuring out what you're going to do to win that game. Yeah. Or what your deck, if you want to have a theme or something. She's a really tricky commander to build a theme around.
When you look at this deck, you're going to see a lot of stuff that says cycle or when something is discarded.
Yep. It looks a bit like a Muldrotha deck.
And I think, Muldrotha is in the creature suite, and I think maybe it was, let's swap it out because Muldrotha is kind of the hot thing right now, and let's not be paint a target on her back. But Damia paints just as big a target, in my opinion.
Yes. And she takes a full turn to work
yes.
versus Muldrotha, where you can play Muldrotha and just do Muldrotha things.
A lot of his stuff also creates tokens, but there's no token support in this deck. So something like an Overwhelming Stampede, as long as you have like a 2/2 or a 3/3 body out, or even having Damia out giving all your tokens +4/+4 and trample, there's a win con.
Yeah. I think just generally speaking, this deck needs a couple of cards that at turn 12, if you are out-resourcing everybody, which in Damia, that's your goal. If you draw one of those cards and you are playing smartly, you should be able to use that card to win the game. And I think Overwhelming Stampede is perhaps one. I think given the discard theme and the fact that you might be discarding a lot, I think Rise of the Dark Realms might get you there. That's a card that can oftentimes be a win condition as well.
Mm-hmm.
Triumph of the Hordes.
Triumph of the Hordes, particularly again in a token deck or a big creature deck, can just win you games. Maybe he's against Infect. I don't know.
As a one-of, and if you don't specifically,
it is a
tutor
one-of.
it up,
Absolutely, it's a one-of.
And
he has no tutors. I don't think in this
He has
deck.
one card that can tutor, which is Razaketh.
Okay.
So and that's an 8
mana.
Yeah. So by the time you drop him, tutor it up, and then go to play it. We're on whatever turn, and by then the game needs to end.
Absolutely, no one's going to feel bad about that happening.
Cards even like Wonder or Brawn would be good in this deck because you're going to discard them.
Yeah.
And then you're going to give your entire team flying. A Gitrog monster with flying is scary.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's his problem here. I think there's a lack of a way to like turn that corner, even if you're ahead, to turn it into a win. And I think that's the big thing I would look at tweaking here. I don't know what else there is really. I know Dan's like a theme deck builder. I was kind of surprised. Having looked at his decks in the past, and I've played with him He's came into the shop before. I put with him in Vegas. We put with him at
Minneapolis.
GP Minneapolis last year. I actually was waiting to see when I saw Damia. I was like, did he build Gorgon Tribal? Is what I was waiting to see.
I don't know if there's enough Gorgons to do it.
There isn't. I've tried.
How many are there? I'm genuinely curious now. Well,
There are 15 total Gorgons, and that's counting Damia. And she's the only one with blue in her colors. So you'd have to add all the changelings.
but you could kind of get there. Listen, it's not going to be great. But man,
They all do something at least. Like
And
every
that's-
Gorgon does something.
yeah, and that's pretty good bragging rights when you beat your friends with Gorgon Tribal. You guys just lost in Damia Sage's own Gorgon Tribal. And there is some synergy there. Then you can maybe run some lure effects. There's enough of those in those colors. So I'm not saying he should revamp his entire deck, but like I was kind of hoping that's what it was. I was hoping it was Gorgon Tribal with a bunch of lures and Nemesis Mask and that kind of stuff. And then reanimator effects on top of that after you kill people when they have to block your scary Gorgons. You then reanimate their stuff. But this is mostly just a value deck, which is what almost every Damia deck I've ever seen was.
So I'm curious about this card, what you guys think. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's new out of the Ravnica Allegiance. 5 mana sorcery in black. Each player discards their hand, creates that many 2/2 zombies. With Damia,
It's got a name like, oh man,
Dana's cat didn't like this card on the EDH.
was it meowing when we were talking
right
about
when you
it?
started talking about this, your cat just got right in your mind. Meow! I'm like, whoa.
your data in the background. Poof.
I know. I pulled one of those cards. I don't know how I feel about that card in this deck, because if you're only going to draw.
You're going to get 7 of them, guaranteed.
But what about your opponents that are playing
it's
a Talrand
play,
cantrip deck?
It's a play.
Awaken
when
the
needed.
Erstwhile is the name of the card.
It's a play in the situation type of card.
Yeah.
Well, he does have a good bit of graveyard hate, so that probably would help that a little bit. Because I think Awaken the Erstwhile, though, you maybe really want to run it in a deck where you've got things like Leyline in the Void, so
Or Rest in Peace.
the discard becomes exiled, so they don't get
I'm
it.
debating on playing it in Alesha just to discard my hand.
Sure, well, but you,
And get zombies and then start reanimating those
the
cards
extra
I
synergy you're
discarded.
going to get probably
Yeah.
makes sense there. Yeah, maybe. He does have it, but I think then that's also he wants additional token synergy then, which Max
Yep.
already mentioned. To do a quick review of the deck, we liked his mana base, but thought he needed a little more ramp. We think he needs some more draw that's consistently going to get him cards ahead to get to the point where Damia is in the game. I think his removal is pretty good, but maybe Beast Within and maybe tweak those board wipes slightly. And he needs to be able to protect his big scary creatures and protect Damia.
Damians specifically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, find ways to win the game when all those pieces have come into play and you get to that turn 11 and you're dominating the game just by having so much value. Then you need to find a way to turn that into a win beyond just chipping people down.
Yep.
And maybe you can, like, chipping people down is a legitimate way to win games too. I've won plenty of games that way, but you can't just rely on
No,
that.
you can't.
When you run into a life gain deck of some sort,
Absolutely.
you're never going to get there.
Or you run into somebody else because you're like, okay, I'm way ahead. I can win this game in the next 4 turns. And then someone else draws their win condition and kills you because you
Took your
spent
time.
so much time trying to win that they hit their perfect combination. So, and he could have gone Gorgon Tribal.
Could have.
Could have.
So, all right. Dan, thank you very much for being a supporter. We really appreciate it. We have some new mics that we're going to be using here in the next couple of weeks coming because of you Patreon supporters helping keep this show on the air and keep us sounding great. So thank you very much for that. We will post some pictures on Twitter once those mics are in and hooked up and live. Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot again to Dan for sharing your deck with us and supporting the show. I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.